Mr. Enrique Morones.
Good job. Thank you. Buenas tardes. Or buenos dias, if you'd like. Can you all hear me okay? Well, I'm delighted to be with you all here, and I'm glad to be back here in Los Angeles and to have been invited to the school to give a talk because it reminds me of the school where I went to in San Diego. My upbringing is probably similar to many of yours. I ended up going to, lived in a working class neighborhood. My dad had 2 jobs. I come from a migrant family. My parents crossed the border because of economic situation. They wanted to make a little bit more money, my dad. And I went to an all-boys Catholic high school, St. Augustine High School in San Diego. And then I was able to, because I went to a fine school like this one, I was able to get a full ride to go to the University of San Diego. And I went to the University of San Diego, which is also a Catholic school. And then I went to the University of San Diego again for my master's. But I want to thank everybody involved in inviting me to come here today. And I also want to recognize Isabel and Shireen and Bob and Rosie that are also here from the Border Angels that have joined us here today. They're going to be filming a little bit of the talk. I want to talk a little bit about Border Angels, who we are, what we do, what is happening on the border, the realities of the border, and immigration today, what's happening with immigration today. And then at the end, hopefully I can interact with you a little bit and you can ask some questions, whether you're a student or one of the teachers. You're all welcome to participate. I was born in San Diego, and my family comes from Mexico. My dad's from Mexico City, my mom's from Culiacan. And since I was young, my parents instilled in me a great love for my roots of Mexico. I'm very proud to be Mexican, but also to be respectful of the country where I live, the United States. And they stress in me what they stress to many of you, that's why you're here, education, the importance of education. And even though I was involved in sports, many pounds ago, I was very involved in sports, it was education. Education was really the key to my success. And as was mentioned, I was with the San Diego Padres, and my dream was always to be actually not with the San Diego Padres, but to be with the San Diego Chargers. But I wasn't good enough. Oh, Charger fans here, all right? You know, they're going to take the National League, and you know, we start off slow. We start off slow, and then eventually this part of our strategy. And but we're going to go to the Super Bowl and so forth. But anyways, to get back on track. So I was always involved in sports has been a big part of my life, but more important has been my family and education. And that's the reason our parents, all our parents have sacrificed to see to it that we go to a school like this school here, or the schools that I went to. It's very similar to the school that I went to. So Border Angels got started actually after I had already graduated from college. And a friend of mine from the great country of El Salvador said, Enrique, I know you cross the border all the time and you go down there to help some of the needy people in Tijuana. How about the needy people here in San Diego? And I said, what are you talking about, Yolanda? Where I live, it's a working class neighborhood. And there's, my family's a needy family. And she says, no, where I live, Yolanda, I live in Carlsbad in the north of San Diego. It's a very wealthy area. But there's migrants, there's people that live in the canyons. And I go, what do you mean people live in the canyons? She goes, people live outdoors all day, all year long. And it's not like the people that you see living here in Los Angeles in the streets or San Diego. These are people that live in canyons because early in the morning, at 3 or 4 in the morning, they get up to go work in the fields, the strawberry fields, the tomato fields. They go and take care of our kids. They build our homes. These are migrants. These are migrants. And I said, they're living outdoors all year? So I started going into those canyons back in 1986, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that the most powerful economy on the face of the earth, the United States, had this situation. And so I started going into those canyons. And my friend from El Salvador, she was a member of St. Elizabeth Seton Catholic Church. So we started this outreach back in 1986. We didn't have a name at first. It was just a couple of us. And then it grew and it grew. In the early 90s, I moved up here to Los Angeles. And I lived in LA from about 1990 to 1993. There was a lot of things happening in LA at the time. There was a lot of tension in the city. My girlfriend back then used to live in the San Fernando Valley. So when I'd be driving back home in the morning, I'd be pulled over by the California Highway Patrol. Or if I was driving in the city, I'd be pulled over by the LAPD. Because according to some, the people that were suspicious of committing crime, like the freeway shootings and so forth, were only people of color, which is a bunch of nonsense. There's criminals of every color, but the people they were pulling over were people of color, like myself, like most of you. And what happened was there was this one man that was pulled over, and he was almost beat to death. He was almost beat to death. And what was unusual was not that that incident happened. What was unusual was that it was caught on film. Today, everything's caught on film. Everything's caught on film. Everybody has their phones with their the tape and all that. But back then, it was very unusual. That young man was a young man named Rodney King. And it happened right over here. It happened in this neighborhood. There was unrest in the city of Los Angeles. People were rioting in the streets. We have had enough, they said. And I was living in LA at that time. So we got together, the Border Rangers, with some other people, and we had an event at the LA Convention Center called Reencuentro. The idea was to bring the communities together because all of us are of the same race, the human race, and we wanted to practice that spirit. So with Reencuentro, we had a big event at the LA Convention Center. About 10,000 people showed up. It was very successful. And at that event, we also had a petition to change one of the names of one of the streets here in Los Angeles because an American hero had died recently. He's a man who now has a state holiday and eventually will have a national holiday. His name is Cesar Chavez. So we had this big drive to change Brooklyn Avenue to Cesar Chavez Avenue. It was sparked by the Chavez family, and it was successful. So Elena, his wife, invited me to East LA College to a celebration of Cesar Chavez's life. And when I was at that celebration, a woman sat next to me and she said, "Enrique, what is it that you do?" So I told her, I go to the canyons and I try to help our brothers and sisters that live down there. We bring food and water and minister to them a little bit. She said, "I never heard of that." And I said, "I only want to do the right thing. People don't need to know about it." And she said, "You're wrong. People do need to know about it." My husband started out like you, not wanting people to know what he was doing. And eventually he got more and more involved. He ran for office and he was assassinated. He was assassinated at the same time that Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968. And that woman that was sitting next to me, that was asking me about my work, was Ethel Kennedy. Her husband, of course, Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy's brother. So I moved back down to San Diego in 1994, and that's when my life took another turn. First, I was sparked by the fact that I saw the people in the canyons, and in 1994, here I am in Los Angeles, moving back down to San Diego, and we have a lot of things happening in California. A very racist proposition was taking place in California at that time, called Proposition 187, which would not allow the children of undocumented people to go to school or receive health care. Now, what fault is it of the kids that their parents decided to cross without papers? But that was going on in California. In California and in the country, there was also a proposition or a free trade agreement that was passed called the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. United States, Canada, and Mexico. Commerce could cross borders, but not people. So what happened? The people from the poorest parts of Mexico that used to live off the land, growing their coffee and corn and selling it, could no longer do that because it was a lot cheaper to buy the U.S. coffee and corn. So they said, I need to provide for my family. So they moved north and crossed borders into the United States. That was in 1994. And a young man in southern Mexico rose up and said, we have rights too. His name is Subcomandante Marcos. That happened in 1994. But the big thing that happened in 1994 that changed border angels from just going into the canyons to bring food and water and have mass and all that was that in 1994, the United States, which the previous decade had said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now the United States was building a wall between San Diego and Tijuana called Operation Gatekeeper. Operation Gatekeeper is the militarization of the border. How could it be that just the previous decade, President Reagan told President Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and now they were building a wall? So what happened was, before that wall was built, 1 or 2 people would die every month crossing from Mexico to the United States, crossing without papers because they couldn't get papers. Now, when the wall was built in October of 1994, 1 or 2 people die every day. Today, 2 people will die crossing the border. There's been 10,000 human beings that have died. And I can guarantee you that nobody in this room could give me the name of 5 of those 10,000 people, or 4, or maybe even 1. 10,000 human beings dying for an opportunity to have an opportunity. They cross the border every day, and they have no legal way of coming in. There is no visa for them. There is no line for them to get into. And it's very sad. Let me tell you the story of a couple of them. Marco Antonio Villaseñor, he was a 5-year-old little boy, 5 years old. And he crossed with his dad, and his dad had a job lined up, so he crossed with a group of people, and as he was crossing, he became very thirsty. So he asked his father for some water. And his father wouldn't give him any water. So he asked the next man, and the next man, and the next. He asked 18 men for water. Nobody would give him water, not even his dad. And why would they not give this little boy water? They were already dead. The father was dead, the 17 other men were dead, and Marco Antonio also died. This happened in Victoria, Texas in the spring of 2003. 19 human beings perished. This happens every day. But there's also women, like Lucrecia Dominguez. Lucrecia crossed because she wanted to be with her husband, who already lived in the United States, and she couldn't get a visa either. So she contracted a smuggler, and the smuggler says, okay, I'll cross you, but don't bring those two little kids with you. Jesus, her 15-year-old son, or Nora, the 7-year-old girl. Why not, she said, because they're going to slow us down. We're going to be crossing in the desert. They're going to slow us down, and the Border Patrol might catch us. But the next day she shows up, and of course the smuggler says, okay, I'll cross them, but you got to pay for each one. So she pays $1,500, $4,500 for the three, and they cross with a group of migrants. And as they're crossing, they do slow down the group. So the smuggler says, I told you not to bring them. I said, and I'm not going to give you your money back. You're on your own. So Lucrecia has to go with Jesus and Nora, and the rest of the group takes off. Lucrecia is walking in the desert, and Lucrecia literally dies in the arms of Jesus, her 15-year-old son, Jesus. This is happening every day. People are dying crossing the border. And it's a sad, sad situation because most people in the country have no idea that this is going on. If the people dying were crossing from Canada, and they were blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, I know for a fact the U.S. government would have done something. But they're not. They're people that look like most of us. And it's just not right. It's just not right. And the United States is a good country. The people are good people, just like the people in Mexico or the people anywhere. But the thing is, they need to know what's going on, like Mrs. Kennedy told me. So Border Angels goes out and speaks at schools. We do debates. We do discussions. We do a lot of work with musicians, for example. We just had an event down in San Diego with Lila Downs that some of you might know. We're working on an event with Santana, which most of you know, the rock group Santana, Maná. We're also doing things in the theater. Josefina Lopez, she wrote a play called Real Women Have Curves. She just wrote another play called Detained in the Desert. So we're doing things to be able to get to the community and let people know what is going on. Because right now, if people said, do you want humane immigration reform? Do you want there to be a legal way for the people to come in? 2/3 of the country says yes. So we got to get it done, but we have a lot of challenges. So right now we have a situation in which Border Angels shifted its focus from just going to the canyons, this is where we started, to going to the desert after all these people started dying. So we started putting water in the desert. This is around 1996 when we started doing that. At that time I was a professional baseball with the San Diego Padres. I was with them from 1995 to 2001. In my last year with the Padres, I got a call from a television show that wanted me to talk about what we were doing because they had heard I was in baseball, that we were putting water in the desert. And this show is a very conservative show. The women wear a lot of clothes. The guy's very serious. You may have heard of it. It's called Sábado Gigante with Don Francisco. Have you guys heard about that show? Well, obviously he's not very serious and he likes to joke around. So I said, okay, Don Francisco, I'll come on your show, but I'm a conservative person and I'm going to talk about a very serious issue. So I don't want you joking around when I'm on the show talking about border. And he goes, okay. So I went on his show. And on his show I read a letter from a woman named Juana. And Juana in her letter says, con lágrimas en los ojos, le rogué que no se fuera. With tears in my eyes, I pleaded for him not to go. She was referring to her son, her 19-year-old son, who was going north to the United States because he wanted to get married. He had his wife back in Mexico, but he needed to make a little bit of money. And he just wanted to come here to work for a little while and then settle down back in Mexico. Well, she became more and more desperate, but she didn't hear from her because her relatives that lived in Los Angeles never responded. And they didn't respond because they hadn't heard from this young man.